Hello, people. Welcome back to another video by your good friend Chad Marco, the big Anarchy. Make sure you guys check out my other social media, attack that like button, and let's have a conversation. So I'm sure you guys know that the big news of this week was the assassination of political commentator, master debater, Charlie Kirk. And it's kind of interesting when it happened. Sometimes when I'm at work, I'll be checking in on 4chan or every now and then. And when I left work and I was driving home, I was like, I haven't checked 4chan in about 2 hours. Something happened. I don't know what it was, bro, but I felt in my bones that when I go home and look at 4chan, there's going to be a big happening. And I guess maybe it's just because of everything that's been going on. We live in such crazy, chaotic times. And so I come home and then I get on R9K first. And the first thing I see is someone shot Charlie Kirk at a debate or a college campus in Utah. And of course, you see the video and he's getting shot in the neck and blood pours out. It's a short clip. And just kind of went from there. Like, all of us were kind of in a rush to figure out what the hell happened. But yeah, he was at a college campus. Charlie Kirk, he was known for doing these public debates where he would debate college kids. And, sometimes it would get pretty heated because he would talk about very controversial issues. He had a lot of talking points that, quite frankly, a lot of normies, they don't know how to quite process it or understand it because, these are things that typically weren't talked about out in public the way that he was trying to do. A lot of things when I was watching the clips that he had pertaining to his debates, these were debates and talking points that I see all the time on places like 4chan or other places online, but he was one of these guys that was taking it out into the real world and debating college kids. And so, he was at this event and he had just got started with the debate, and then boom, somebody had shot him in the neck, and then you see the blood just gush out. And the only silver lining I can kind of take away from it is that it looked like he might have died damn near instantly, or at least didn't have to suffer. Because when you watch it, it's like he gets hit, and of course his body like jerks. There's a reaction, but then his body just seizes. Like his arms kind of like stiffens up, and he just passes out. Like, I'm sure the impact of the bullet probably knocked him out, and then they say the bullet might have hit his jugular and severed his spine or destroyed his spine. But it looked like at the very least it was instantaneous. Like when you see it, it's like, oh, he's not surviving it. Like that was a kill shot. And it kind of spawned different conspiracies as far as like who killed him and why. And at this point, the shooter has been identified, but when it first happened, the first ideas that people had, I think that like the first thing that was on everybody's mind was they had to be like some deranged leftist or some psychotic liberal, because Charlie Kirk, he was known for being a very conservative man. He was, Christian, conservative, traditional, alt-right, far right. He was a MAGA hat. He was a MAGA supporter. And, he had gotten famous enough and influential enough to where he was actually like rubbing elbows with some pretty important people. You can find pictures of him with Donald Trump and his administration. He was cool with people like Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens. Those were some of his close friends, actually. So, this wasn't like some small time content creator or political commentator. Like, he was probably one of the most influential that we have in that space. And it got to the point where they actually did an episode about him on South Park. But again, because of the topics that he was talking about and some of his opinions and perspectives, That's why people speculated that it might have been somebody on the left, like again, a psychotic liberal that just wanted to silence him because of his views. And then another conspiracy that I saw, some people thought it was fake, that it was staged, it was AI, because there was like this weird thing about the ring on his finger like moving after he got shot. And with AI videos and pictures, they have a hard time getting the fingers and hands right. So when you watch the video closely, it looks like his ring finger moves from his it looks like the ring on his ring finger moves from that finger to his pinky finger. But then people later on pointed out that he wears a ring that is like, it's not one you pull off, it's one that you can snap open and snap back closed. And so they feel that it might have been loose and then moved over to the pinky finger. It still looks really weird, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not quite a believer in that theory, but I still haven't seen a good explanation as to why that ring moved the way that it did. It was kind of crazy, unless he was already like fumbling with it right before he got shot. Doesn't really make sense, but whatever. We're gonna go with the idea that it's not AI, right? And one of the more popular theories was that it might have been connected to Israel. We live in a time where a lot of people have been digging up different Israel, Mossad, Jewish-related conspiracies. And now the thing about Charlie Kirk was that with him being MAGA, of course, you would expect he's someone that's very pro-Israel. And, he was always known for being, a person that, during this whole Israel versus Gaza conflict, he has heavily been on the side of Israel, despite how they've been conducting the so-called war over there in Gaza. But recently, people pointed out that his stance on Israel has begun to sort of shift a little bit, because he started pointing out certain things like how, there's that theory that the October 7th attack, which started the war in Gaza, he was talking about how, based on his understanding of the IDF and Israel, that it makes no sense that they were under attack for 6 hours before there was a retaliation. And so he was kind of adding fuel to that fire of the belief that October 7th was allowed to happen to justify the war in Gaza. And for someone that had been supporting Israel as much as he has for so long, that was kind of a big deal. And you can also find posts where he was kind of criticizing the ADL for promoting the ideas of anti-Semitism laws that would basically get in the way of, the First Amendment, freedom of speech, things of that nature. And then there's a guy, I forgot his name, but he's he works with InfoWars and Alex Jones. And you can find a tweet where a month before this assassination happened, he talked about how somebody close to Charlie Kirk said that, if he turns on Israel, he feels he's gonna be killed. And then a month later, he's killed. And so that became one of the more like popular theories, especially considering the fact that, people were looking at this assassination as looking pretty professional because of the way that, he was taken out with one shot. You had that guy, I forgot his name, but it was this old white man that sort of acted as a distraction during the debate. Well, after, Charlie Kirk was killed, the police apprehended him because he was acting like he was a shooter, but he wasn't the shooter. So people were like, wait a minute, this guy he might have been acting as a distraction. And then that guy's story goes even deeper because he has a history of causing distractions at some of like prominent events. I think he was on the scene during like 9/11. He was close by during the Boston Marathon bombings. So people are like, who the hell is this guy? Like, is he some type of like agent or something? And then the fact that the shooter kind of initially got away with it. And so that's why people were starting to think this might have been a high level assassination, not just some deranged lefty. But, Eventually, the shooter, or the alleged shooter, we might want to say at this point, has been caught. And it when he was caught, it kind of confirmed the first theory that it might have just been a deranged lefty, because he's a young guy, and from the information that's coming out, he was raised conservative and right wing. However, it seems like he's kind of an example of, how sometimes kids are raised a certain way by their parents, but then they go in the opposite direction. That seems to be the case with this guy, that he was raised in a very right wing home and ended up becoming liberal after going to college. They say he was dating a transgender individual. But there's still some sketchiness about this guy. There's a lot that we don't know, but essentially people are looking at him as being a deranged lefty. So the first conspiracy seems to have the most credence thus far. Now, ever since Charlie Kirk has been killed, there's been a lot of mixed reactions to his death. Of course, those on the right, they have been mourning his death and talking about how terrible it is. And those on the left, they've been celebrating it. And that's been one of the big issues today, is people's reaction to Charlie Kirk's assassination. People mourning him, people celebrating his assassination, and everything in between. Me personally, my reaction was just damn. I'd be lying if I said I felt strongly one way or another. Because again, I don't know the guy. I don't know him, and I wasn't following him closely enough to really give a fuck. So I'm not mourning him, nor am I celebrating his death. But at the same time, when I see these people who are getting upset that there are those that are celebrating his death, to me, that's kind of crazy. Yeah, I think, because the thing about it is that I believe that when a person dies, you receive the reaction that you earn. People react to your death based on who you were and how you lived your life. And, I'm not saying that Charlie Kirk was some monster or anything like that, but the thing about Charlie Kirk, and we have to be honest about this shit, because this is just a growing trend in terms of social media influencers, is that I've noticed this, is that these guys now, they go out of their way to agitate and offend people because they know that it's going to get them more attention. They say things they say provocative things on purpose just to get more views, just to get more clicks, just to get more likes, just to get more attention. And I've been watching this for a while, and I've never respected people who do shit like this. People like Charleston White, Nick Fuentes, Charlie Kirk, anyone, Myron Gaines, Andrew Tate. I don't respect that shit. Stephen Molyneux, I see it, and I know it when I see it. And look, I respect the hustle. Look, if that's what you got to do to get more clicks and more views and get your revenue, I get it, get your money. But on a personal level, I've never respected that shit, ever. And, I'm someone, I thought about doing stuff like that myself, but I've always caught myself, because I think when it comes down to it, it goes against my integrity to do shit like that. And so part of the reason why I don't really give a damn or have sympathy for him is because I put him in that group of people who go out of their way to try to agitate others, because they know it's effective in terms of being in the algorithm and, engagement farming, rage baiting. I mean, dude, I have no respect for people who do shit like that. And I put him in that category. Now, I get it. Sometimes you just have views and opinions that people just aren't going to like. Even myself, I'm sure that I have views that would be controversial. Like in fact, based on some of the things that I've seen him say, I'm like, oh, I actually agree with that. But it's a difference between doing that and then making a career out of agitating people and then running with that. Because I feel like when we talk about debates now, they're really not had in good faith. You can say, oh, well, he just wanted to debate. He just wanted to talk to people. But no, you can read between the lines and tell that we live in a time where when people engage in these so-called debates online and things like that, it's not done in good faith. It's done to win. It's about win-lose. It's not about people coming together and sharing ideas and making points and then putting those good points together and then coming to some type of understanding. It's not about that. It's about, I want to win this debate and make you look stupid on both sides. And you know, it's kind of like, I remember when I had that interview with Iris, and I told myself, I made a point in my mind before I talked to her. I was like, I'm not going to turn this into, you know, me trying to like talk circles around her about, you know, controversial issues, especially like the whole film sale thing, right? I remember I told myself that, because doing that shit, it might get you a nice clippable moment that might go viral and people can laugh at. But again, to me, when you start thinking like that, you're not thinking about a debate in good faith. And that's why, honestly, you know, even though I'm not celebrating his death, I don't respect people like Charlie Kirk, because they do shit like that. And even the fact that to go out of your way to have these debates with kids at college who barely know who they are at this point. Again, it's like you're aiming down. You're having debates against people who are more than likely not even going to be on your level in terms of like the amount of research they've done, understanding of the world and things like that. So again, what are you doing? You're looking for clickable moments. You're looking for that viral moment. So that's why I don't respect them personally. But again, to say I'm clapping and dancing about it, you know, that would be inaccurate as well. I just don't care either way, to be honest with you. You know, it's gotten to the point where with the people who have been celebrating their deaths, you know, people on the right, they've been like reporting these people, like finding out where they work and trying to get them fired from their jobs. And, you know, quite a few people have been fired behind things they posted about Charlie Kirk online in terms of actually like celebrating his death. And, you know, it's interesting because somebody had brought this up, and I saw the post, and they were basically talking about how it's deeper than just, you know, people celebrating and then other people trying to get them fired. And they were talking about like, this is kind of actually leading us closer towards, you know, a sort of like authoritarian environment in terms of society, you know, where people are now snitching on each other according to the norms of the established the government and the dictator, if you will, and the particular political power that is in control at that moment. So it's like it's almost like, you know, we're snitching on each other in terms of who has the wrong thoughts, the wrong beliefs, and so forth. And, you know, that's a good point, but we got to rewind. We got to rewind, because what we're seeing with the people on the right reporting the people on the left who have been celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, it's no different than when the left was doing the whole cancel culture thing. You remember when they would go out of their way to get people canceled, especially like celebrities who had, you know, the wrong beliefs, the wrong opinions, the wrong thoughts. And I saw somebody mention that what we're seeing is really just the pendulum swinging, you know, because at first when the left was in power, then they were using the ability to cancel people and they celebrated it. They did it with glee. They didn't care. But now that the pendulum has swung towards the right and they have their opportunity to do the same thing, they're doing it as well. Now, as I take a step back and I look at it as a whole, I don't agree with either side on this. I don't, you know, everything from the cancel culture of the left and how the right has been politicizing Charlie Kirk's death in order to silence people that they don't like, or to try to dictate how other people should respond to someone's death. Because people have been pointing out that, there have been plenty of instances where the right were celebrating or making light of people's death. George Floyd, especially. Now, of course, when you compare George Floyd to Charlie Kirk, that's not quite an equal comparison. But to be fair, a lot of people, they've been coming at this from like a religious and godly perspective, right? What would God think? Would God want you to say, I get that you ain't like him, but God ain't. But if we talking God, if we doing that God talk, then God wouldn't want you to talk ugly of George Floyd either, who was really at worst a petty criminal, And I remember when George Floyd, this whole shit went down, when George Floyd was killed, that was one of the main things I talked about, was that when I watched that video, I saw a lack of empathy from the police officers. They saw him as just like some fentanyl addict criminal, and they treated him like shit. He told them that he couldn't breathe, and they said, let me put my damn knee on your neck. Lack of empathy. But what I'm saying is that, it's really been a lot of hypocrisy, and people have been taking advantage of Charlie Kirk's death to, basically get some jabs in, or to try to criticize and control how other people should think about his death. But then again, I get it, because the same thing has been done to the right over the past probably decade or so. So, it's not about taking a side. It's more so about, we got to take a step back and be like, damn, like we are really being played against each other. And also, it can be our own faults at times, how we, don't realize our own hypocrisy and our tendency to, again, try to politicize certain events, so that we can get we can get some points on the scoreboard against what we perceive to be our political opposites. But I gotta say, going back to the Charlie Kirk assassination, there was an undeniable level of irony about how he was killed based on some of the things that he said in the past, because a lot of people highlighted that, he was someone that was in favor of the Second Amendment. And he even said that innocent people being killed because of the Second Amendment is a necessary sacrifice in order to have freedom, or the freedom to bear arms. And the fact that he ended up becoming one of those sacrifices, a lot of people pointed out the irony of that. And not only that, but right before he got killed, he was talking about gun violence in America. And he was about to make his famous point about a lot of gun violence in America being exacerbated by gang violence, or more specifically, nigga violence. Let's be honest. And like right before he was about to make that point, because he said, I think he said gang violence. He put the mic down, and then boom, he got shot right in the neck. And so a lot of people were pointing out just the irony of his stance on the Second Amendment and what he said before he got shot, and then to get shot in that moment. I mean, it was very ironic, almost poetic in a way, in a fucked up, dark humor sort of way, if you will. But, I've seen a lot of people, the ones that have been celebrating his death, I've seen a lot of them point out different clips, and really both sides are doing this. Like, both sides are trying to take the best and worst clips of of Charlie Kirk. Whew, Freudian slip there. But people are trying to take the best and worst clips of Charlie Kirk to kind of prove their point, right? And again, I've been kind of paying attention to this, and I've never watched him that closely. I've seen him here and there, but I'm kind of going along on watching these different clips. And one thing, and I will say this in Charlie Kirk's defense. I think a lot of the talking points and beliefs that he had, I believe that have been used to justify hating him and not liking him. I honestly think that a lot of people don't really understand what he was trying to say, or they didn't have the right information, or they were too normie to process the information. And I'll give you a few good ones, right? So, of course, like I was just talking about, with Charlie Kirk and his stance on the Second Amendment. And when he talks about the sacrifices necessary to have freedom, I 100% agree with that. You cannot have freedom without sacrifices. Whenever we have the freedom to do something, you're always going to have people who are going to abuse that freedom. And so if you claim to believe in freedom and liberty and things like that, you have to also understand that one of the downsides and the cost of that is that you're going to have people who abuse that right. And so we look at something like the Second Amendment. Now, of course, the gun violence has gotten completely out of control. I'm not going to argue with that. But it's an example of a important freedom that we have. Like, I don't think people really understand like the power and the significance of that, to be able to own guns and the difference it can make in terms of how your government deals with you. When you go back to like COVID-19, and when you look at places like Canada or Australia that don't have the same amount of gun rights that we do, and how they were getting beat up in the street because they want to go outside, that's kind of what guns allow us to avoid. Stuff like that. When you look at the Ukraine and how they have this war against Russia, and they've been kidnapping men out of their homes and out of the streets to be able to force them into the meat grinder, that's kind of one of the things that the Second Amendment would protect us for. And so I think people don't really get like that barrier that guns put between us and the government in terms of what they can do to us. So that's why on that, I can see where he was coming from. But also, when he talked about things like gang violence in particular, and because the thing about it, what we're seeing with the gun violence in America is that when you put everything together, it looks really bad. But if you isolate the gang violence, and if we could deal with that, all of a sudden the gun violence is left over. It doesn't look as bad anymore. It's still terrible, don't get me wrong, especially like this trend of like school shootings. But it's almost like gang violence represents the bulk of the iceberg in terms of gun violence, and the other stuff is like the tip of the iceberg. And so he was basically making a point that if we could address the gang violence issue, which is linked to single motherhood, linked to the black community, linked to subsidizing these low-income housing areas and things like that. And so he was making those connections, and I've made those same connections. So, if people hated him for that, they would hate me for that, because I have that same belief that a lot of gun violence in America is clearly linked to gangs, which are linked to low-income housing, project ghetto areas, which are linked to single mothers, which are linked to the welfare state, et cetera, et cetera. And he made that same point that I made. And so that's why when I was watching it, I was like, people took that to say, oh, he's racist. Now if I say it, I'm a Uncle Tom, I'm a coon. So it's one of those difficult conversations to have where I just think a lot of people aren't ready to have that talk. And people have been clinging to that to say that, oh, well, that proves he's a racist. Now, another thing too was his stance on abortion, where people have been sharing a clip where he talked about how if his 10-year-old daughter was raped, he would want her to keep the child because he's pro-life, according to his religious beliefs and things like that. And people look at it and say, oh, you monster, how dare you, your 10-year-old child. But now, me, myself, I'm someone who, like, I consider myself to be pro-choice, but personally, I would never co-sign an abortion. So that's kind of like like if I got a girl pregnant, I'm like, I'm gonna fight for her not to have the abortion. Like that's my stance. I don't care what somebody does based on their own freedom, but if I have a say, I'm gonna go, let's not do that. Basically. But when you talk about the scenario of your daughter being raped and having to bear the child, that, like, there is no easy answer for that, And so that's why to me, that's another example of sort of a hypothetical or one of his opinions or perspectives that I think people kind of ran with unfairly to say that he is a misogynist or he's a bad parent, because that is probably one of the hardest decisions that you can make. Like, to me, there is no right answer with that. Like, that's terrible. That's terrible either way. You know, you either destroy an unborn child or your daughter has to give birth to the child of someone that raped her. And see, I think, and just to kind of to give the other side a bit of credence here with this hypothetical, you know, as look at it from like a man perspective, right? As men, if you're a man, as men, if you were raped, you would want to kill that motherfucker, no less. Like, it's on sight. But think about it. Is death a equal punishment for rape? You can make a strong argument that it's not. But you don't give a damn. If we, as men, if we're raped, we killing the nigga. It's gonna be bloodshed. It's gonna be a bloodbath. And so what I'm saying is like, when something like that happens to you, it's so traumatizing that it's no longer about logic and things like that. And then for a woman to have to go the extra mile of carrying the child of the person that raped them, like that's a trauma. That is a bad feeling that I don't even think men can wrap our heads around, you know. But I'm just saying, just like, I get it from both perspectives though. Again, it's a hard fucking question. And so it's like, whichever side you choose, whatever you do, you look crazy. It look bad either way. And that's why I would say it's another example of, like, again, people unfairly taking one of his opinions and beliefs and trying to use it to say that he's this or that. That's just a hard question right there, bro. Now, I will say this though, because that's, you know, when we talk about opinions, that's important too, because people are saying that, oh, you know, to be killed for opinions, be killed for perspectives and this and that. I don't think that's really accurate to say, you know, because your opinions and your views, your perspective, that's, in a way, you're expressing who you are. So I'll give you a good example. You know, if Charlie Kirk was alive and let's say we gave him, we made him dictator to do whatever he wanted to do, you think he wouldn't ban abortion completely on every level? You think that he wouldn't do everything he could to enforce his belief system on the masses of people? I'm pretty sure he would, or at least something close to that, you know. And so I'm just saying that when people try to belittle what he did in terms of just an opinion, I just don't think that's really accurate, because I think that when you talk about these things, the truth is, if you had the power or any influence, you would fight for that to happen. You would fight for those policies to change, those laws to change. And so you got to remember that when you're out here talking the things that you're talking about, when you're expressing the things you're expressing, you need to remember that, because it's not just an opinion to most people. You're expressing who you are and what you would do if you had the power. If any sort of influence and weight that you have to throw around in the world, you're going to try to get your ideas and your beliefs through the door. And so, you know, and I had this conversation too, and this is an interesting one that I don't really see people having. You know, people talk about how this young man might have been radicalized by the left, or we could say some people could be radicalized by the right, the far right, whatever you want to do. Again, I'm not taking sides here, but I think there's one thing that we don't really talk about, and the possibility of people being radicalized by the Second Amendment. Think about it. Now, we all know that one of the big reasons why we have the Second Amendment was that the founding fathers of America, they thought it was important for citizens to be able to own firearms in order to be able to fight back against a tyrannical government. And so you fast forward today, and now we're seeing political violence. Now, of course, Charlie Kirk is not like he's in the White House deciding policy, but again, he's rubbing elbows with these people. And he has a certain amount of influence. He has a certain amount of reach. He can affect some level of change in the world. So now, again, you have people who are looking at it from their mind, MAGA, the far right, alt-right, whatever. They're looking at them like, oh man, this is tyranny. Donald Trump is a dictator. He's the reincarnation of Hitler. And it's not to agree with them or not. That's not what I'm saying. But it's that at the end of the day, people's perspective is always based on subjectivity. So it's like when we look back at something like Nazi Germany, there were people who looked at Hitler and his administration and his team as, oh, these are just, tyrannical tyrants, dictators. Then there was some that were like, I love Hitler. And you can say the same about any government. Any government, no matter how good, no matter how evil, how bad, there are going to be some people that agree and that love them, and there are going to be some people that disagree and hate them. So we know people hate the Trump administration and MAGA and that whole movement, the far right. And really, to be honest, the feeling is probably somewhat mutual. But think about when you connect those thoughts. Okay, I have the right to bear arms against what I perceive to be a tyrannical government. And I also believe that our current government is tyrannical. Okay, it's time to get busy. Like, I'm just throwing it out there. Is it not possible that the purpose of the Second Amendment, while designed with good intention, can also radicalize people into thinking they have the right to do something like this? That's all I'm saying. I know it's easy to just think this guy is crazy and out of his mind, but I think you have to look at that as a possibility as well. Is that people can look at the Second Amendment as a justification for doing the political violence. Again, and this goes back to, I forgot his last name, but you guys remember Luigi, the guy who killed that CEO. And then there was that other one, the Blasian guy that killed another CEO. So I'm just saying, like, we got to throw that out there as a possibility that the Second Amendment also has a radicalizing effect during times like now where the political climate is so heated. I mean, we're at a different level of beef and tension and hatred between the left and the right. And I feel like something like this is kind of like the culmination of all that negative energy. And we finally had like a big unfortunate event to kind of top everything off. And hopefully things will dissipate going into the future. But, with people calling for civil war, and then the people on the right going out of their way to try to get people fired and antagonize them, I think it seems like there's just more fuel being added to the fire. But with that being said, it's an unfortunate event that occurred. Charlie Kirk, he was a young man. He was a family man. Again, I didn't necessarily like him, but I didn't dislike him either. Just unfortunate. It's unfortunate to be killed that way, and also to be killed, in such humiliating fashion. The last point that I'll make on this, going back to, social media influencers, because you can put him in that group. What Charlie Kirk did is kind of similar to what we saw with Kevin Samuels in a way when you think about it, right? What did Kevin Samuels do? He took red pill talking points that were typically talked about in the basement of the internet and brought it upstairs. And not only that, but he had those conversations directly with women. And that's part of what made him so big. And then he popularized that. And I say also, you got to give Fresh and Fit credit for doing something similar. And I think Charlie Kirk is similar in a way in that he took these sort of political hot takes, these ideas, and opinions and talking points that would normally only be discussed on places like 4chan or, you know, other more like underground websites. And I'm not saying like he's the first, but because we started to kind of see these things become to kind of rise to the surface a bit more in terms of being talked about. But he took it from the internet and brought it to real life. And the end result of that was him getting assassinated, was him being killed publicly. And I just feel like for social media influencers, especially when you look at how people like Myron reacted, Myron Gaines of Fresh and Fit, and some of these other guys, even Sam Hyde, this shit made Sam Hyde drop his 30 layers of irony for once. I think that's why they take it so personally, because they know that it could have been them. It could have been Myron Gaines. It could have been Sam Hyde. It could have been Nick Fuentes. It could have been any one of them. Candace Owens. It could have been one of them. Because nobody expected that taking these talking points and having these discussions out in the public would lead to this. But we are really talking about having some of the most difficult but necessary discussions and having it publicly. And this is the result. It's really kind of scary when you look at it, especially from the perspective of a content creator, because in a way, Charlie Kirk kind of, you know, not only was he a sacrifice for the Second Amendment, he was a sacrifice in terms of, you know, being a social media influencer, wanting to take, I'm not going to say radical, but controversial beliefs out into public and to engage with other people in those beliefs, and then lost his life behind it. So really kind of dark shit, man. But I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and I'll see you in the next. So, Johnny.